Again, my name is Tara Medvey, and I'm the Director of Individual Giving. I hope you're all well and safe and healthy and in a comfortable space wherever it is that you are. And thank you again for joining us today. As a reminder, you can use the Q&A tool to submit questions to our panelists today. And you can use the chat function just to introduce yourself and let us know that you're here, where you're joining us from. And again, the session will be recorded and we will be sharing a link within a day or so. So to start, I just want to say that we know that it's been a turbulent few months for all of us, and just wanted to start with a quick temperature check and an overview about who's with us today. So we are really pleased to have more than 78 people register for today's donor briefing. As of right now, we have about 50 people on the call. We are expecting probably people will be coming in as we're moving through this. And I want to thank you again for everyone who filled out the pre-survey. We received more than 62 responses and a lot of great questions for our panelists. So I want to just take a couple of minutes to share a bit about what we learned from you all. So as you can see, one of the questions we asked you how you were feeling today. And as you can see from the responses, we're all experiencing a vast range of emotions. Many of us are feeling anxious, tired, distracted, but we are also feeling happy and hopeful. And more than anything, we are feeling grateful. And that is certainly true for me. And I'm really grateful to be here in community with you all today. We also asked, what are you worried or concerned about right now? And, it's no surprise to see that the majority of us, more than 70%, are concerned about the health of our families and our communities, both near and far. And that many of us are concerned about our economic security and the impact this pandemic is having on future generations. These are truly unprecedented times. And I want to acknowledge how much we are all holding right now. And thank you again for making time to be with us this afternoon. We also asked, has your giving strategy or priorities changed for 2020 in response to the pandemic? And the majority of you, 52%, reported giving the same amount or more to organizations that you are already supporting. And 45% of you are giving to new or different organizations. So thank you all for everything you are doing to show up for Horizons, for our grantee partners, and for our community at this critical time. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Horizons President, Roger Dowdy.
So good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. As you can see from the quote here from our partner organization in San Francisco, Queer Life Space, the pandemic has hit the queer community in devastating ways. And that is absolutely true. And it's especially true directly to literally tens of thousands of people in our community in the Bay Area alone. This pandemic is impacting every corner of our community, from artists suddenly with no income, to LGBTQ people in prison, to LGBTQ elders, to people who are trapped in unsafe environments. The devastation truly is already everywhere. And so many in our community are already vulnerable. As many of you have probably seen, I know I have seen on a number of occasions in the press, reports of how the pandemic is laying bare inequities in society, inequities that have long been there but are now just laid open. And those touch on race, they touch on gender, they touch on income and wealth. And all of those are critically important for how we look at the impact of this pandemic. But what we almost never see is anything about LGBTQ people, when in fact, there are reasons that we as a community are especially vulnerable to something like the pandemic. So for example, and as you see on the slide in front of you, according to Horizons' own community needs assessment, 1 in 5 of us in the Bay Area had trouble meeting a basic need, such as accessing medical care. 1 in 3 of us could not access a basic service, such as healthcare or housing. In addition, we look to national data, and when we see national data, we can see that just rates of poverty, and this comes as a surprise even to some people in our own community, that whereas among straight and cisgender people, 16% is the poverty rate, in our community it's 22%, which is actually 38% higher. And if we look at just the transgender community, it's 29%, and the Black and transgender community, the poverty rate hits 40%. We also have a high proportion of our people who are working in service industries, so disproportionately high, which we know have been impacted especially hard by the economic impact of the pandemic. We can also look at food insecurity. The Williams Institute at UCLA published a study not long ago showing that while 17% of people who reported food insecurity in the general population in the country, 27% of people reported food insecurity in our community. And then of course there are the medical vulnerabilities, as you see on the slide here, such as higher rates of HIV and cancer, discrimination that has been experienced by so many in our community in healthcare settings, which of course discourages people from going to get healthcare in the first place, which is the last thing you want in a pandemic. We have higher rates of tobacco use and numerous other things that leave people vulnerable. This has also been devastating in a second way, and that's been to community organizations. We see as the Curry Senior Center, which is in the Tenderloin and a grantee of our COVID fund, demand is skyrocketing. Groups are having to alter, sometimes radically, how they deliver their programs and services and reach people at the same time as their revenue is being hammered. Now 2020, as many of you on this know, is Horizon's 40th anniversary year. And for the past 40 years, Horizons has played critical roles in building and supporting the full range and diversity of our community and of helping to make sure that we are able to meet the threats that inevitably come our way. When HIV struck, Horizons was the first foundation to make a grant. When Prop 8 threatened us, Horizons made one of the first six-figure grants to stop it. When the Great Recession bore down on us, Horizons created what we called the Intentional Change Fund to help organizations navigate those turbulent waters. And when the 45th president rampaged onto the national stage, Horizons was there to make special grants to some of the most vulnerable parts of our community. And so when COVID-19 broke, and ever since then, our singular goal has been to ensure that our community can respond to this unprecedented calamity. We connected nonprofits to vital information. We brought together our professional advisors. Our leadership convenings for LGBTQ executive directors have seen record attendance. And from the beginning, as we have for 40 years, we set out to marshal resources to get funds out into our community as quickly as possible. And to date, we have been able to make $641,500 in grants out of our COVID emergency fund. And this story is not just a story about that number. It is actually a story that illustrates very clearly what Horizon's role is in bringing the community together and bringing resources together. And that is how community foundations work. The first step in the story was when on March 17th, Horizon's board of directors designated $200,000 from our annual endowment draw to be used immediately to seed this fund and to go out in grants to the community. And then we turned to our donors. And so many of you on this call responded, as well as so many others, gifts from $5 to $30,000, and together making up nearly $200,000 in contributions. And then we went out to non-LGBTQ foundations, many of them multiple times the size of Horizons. And we worked with them, and some of them came to seek us because they know that Horizons knows this community, and put together, that was another $250,000 for a total to date of $641,000. Now we are painfully aware that $641,000 is nowhere near enough. Far more is needed. And the emergency fund remains open for contributions. And I want to thank every one of you who has given to this fund, because your gifts are making a difference. They're making a difference right now. To people from Santa Clara to Solano, from transgender people in the Tenderloin to Latinx people in San Jose, from East Bay elders to youth on the streets of San Francisco, and far, far more. So thank you for your contributions. And at this time, I have the great privilege of turning this over to my colleague, Francisco Bushting, our Vice President of Grants, Programs, and Communications, who has been directing our work in the COVID Fund to share some more information, some more details about what it is we are learning and what it is that we are seeing. Francisco?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to echo Roger's words of thank you to all donors and foundation partners who have really made it possible for us to have the resources to be able to award a total of $641,500, as Roger said, to 65 LGBTQ organizations and programs throughout Horizon's LGBTQ COVID-19 response emergency grants. One of the unique aspects of Horizons is our history and ability to respond to moments of great need by being flexible and innovative, working in community as we always do, and putting into action the expertise and knowledge Horizons has of the LGBTQ nonprofit ecosystem, an ecosystem that we've been fortunate to partner with and fund for the last 40 years. All this was taken into account when we started to design this initiative 9 weeks ago, opening up the portal to accept the first application 7 weeks ago, and begin awarding the first round of funding 5 weeks ago. It is an aggressive timeline, but it's what Horizons as your community foundation can and should do at this time. The goal of Horizons LGBTQ COVID-19 response emergency grant making is twofold. One is to help Bay Area LGBTQ nonprofit organizations respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the second goal is to provide immediate financial support to LGBTQ organizations that play critical roles in the infrastructure of the LGBT community in the San Francisco Bay Area. These goals are not exclusive. Actually, they overlap and complement each other. And I would like to share some high-level data about the funding we have made thus far through this initiative. Through the awards made to the 65 COVID-19 grantee partners, we were able to make sure that the work being funded through this responsive grant-making initiative reaches across the 9 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area. Just like we have done in the past, Horizons makes sure that the work being funded is specific to the geographical differences across the 9 counties, from urban to rural, to the way LGBT community organizes and access services, and to area-specific needs. One of the characteristics of the LGBT community is the diversity within our community. As in the past, especially with COVID-19, it is important that the work funded by Horizons is able to reach all segments of our community in a culturally appropriate way. On this slide, you have 4 high-level demographics among many more that we track to make sure we are funding the entire community. These categories are not exclusive, so an organization like Ella para Translatinas will be capturing both transgender and people of color. We have also funded many long-term grantee partners, some that Horizons has supported for decades, like Open Hand, that delivered food in the 80s to people with AIDS, to today delivering meals to LGBTQ seniors at home so they can shelter in place during COVID-19. Likewise, we are also funding equally critical but more recent organizations. For example, organizations like LGBTQ Asylum Project and Oasis, both organizations working with LGBTI refugees and asylees in the San Francisco Bay Area, whose lives have become even more perilous in this crisis. One very exciting thing we're seeing is how many of the LGBT organizations at the front line of COVID-19 pandemic are working together, collaborating in new ways to better respond, not as singular organizations, but as a robust ecosystem of LGBTQ nonprofits Horizons is able to partner with at this time of great need and uncertainty. They thoroughly exemplify the hope, the generosity, community, resiliency, and the pride that can only come from our community. The 65 grantee partners funded through this rapid response initiative address COVID-19 specific needs. Yes, like Lyric, as shown in this quote on this slide, is able to help queer youth find alternative shelter during the pandemic, since their current home environment is exposing them to emotional violence due to their sexual orientation and gender identity. Many other organizations are responding to needs that are specific to our community during COVID-19. LGBTQ specific needs that may not be addressed or may be overlooked by other funding sources, but we as LGBTQ people know too well. And now I would like to introduce Derek Barnes, who is a member of Horizon's Board of Directors and also a member of Horizon's Grants and Program Committee. Derek?
Hello, I think I'm live. Thanks, Francisco. Can everyone hear me? Terrific. Thanks, Francisco, and a huge thank you to all of our donors and supporters who are with us today. Let me start by presenting the case for supporting Horizons Foundation and our LGBTQ nonprofits, and why it's even more important today by providing some sobering and some encouraging news. Here's the current situation, everyone. Like so many of you have already witnessed during this pandemic emergency, I have been confronted by the confluence of entrenched inequity, social injustice, economic disparity, and the general lack of access to essential and life-sustaining services, especially among the most vulnerable, as Francisco and Roger alluded to earlier. These are segments of our community that have been really, really hit hard. The good news is that through the work of Horizons Foundation over the last 40 years, we've already proven that collectively as a community, we can do extraordinary things when faced with a crisis. I believe this present time is no different. When we all come together to focus on shared goals with equitable distribution of benefit across the LGBTQ spectrum, our community is agile, it's innovative, and resilient when it comes to overcoming adversity. The program models that our LGBTQ leaders conceive, develop, and engage can be shared and replicated to help so many more in our community. And I think this is a really, really important point. Horizons Foundation has always believed that investments in new programmatic services and the expansion of ongoing models that sustain our community is vital. I like to call this like our multiplier impact or multiplier effect. Today more than ever, the need for a community foundation like Horizons ensures that we can meet future needs that we can't even imagine today. As someone who has served on a variety of national and local LGBTQ organizations, I am so honored to serve on the Horizons Foundation Board of Directors. I love being of service and involved in solving such big problems. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed some major flaws in our social support systems that have exacerbated already untenable conditions. Nonprofits with forward-thinking missions are now pivoting to more tactical harm reduction activities due to COVID-19. And the need for, the need is overwhelming, and it presents some new challenges for Horizons to help our nonprofit partners overcome. The rapid response funding that Horizons Foundation has dispersed to date is just unprecedented. Here are some key components that Horizons Foundation leadership staff and the grant committee were able to execute. We quickly identified and responded to an urgent and unplanned need in the community. We effectively engaged facilities to make needed funds available through our endowment and reserves, direct fundraising, and DAF influence. We streamlined the process for grantee applications and quickly deployed funds where they are urgently needed, the most vulnerable and underserved segments of our community. I know that in this moment, it can really feel like we cannot do enough, or there's never enough, and it's never ending. But I urge each and every one of you to not give up. I haven't given up. Each one of us has the capacity to make lasting change through our own personal involvement. The ever-present question is, what can you do right now, given your influence, time, and available resources? And so on behalf of the Horizons Board of Directors, I want to thank you for your continued support and being in partnership with us in supporting our community and all of our LGBT organizations. And now I'd like to turn the remainder of today's presentation over to Tara, Roger, and Francisco for Q&A.
Thank you, Derek. So I want to remind all of our attendees today, if you have any questions for our panelists, you can use the Q&A tool, which should be along the bottom of your screen, to submit any questions that you have. Thank you to everyone who has already submitted their questions. Definitely keep them coming as we will try to answer as many questions as possible. So our first question, this one is for you, Roger. We have folks want to know, how is Horizons working in coalition with funding partners to maximize giving and move resources to the community?
Well, we're working in multiple ways. And I think as other people have said, and some with great eloquence, this is a time when all of us need more than ever to work together, whether that's in our community or in the Congress or in anywhere else. So we are very much working in concert with other people. We're working with foundations, as I mentioned, trying to marshal as much in the way of resources as possible. And we're at $250,000 that we have brought to the community, and we're not finished. We're hoping that we will be able to bring still more. On the other end, we're also working very closely with some of our grantee partners. Not just as providing them with grant funding, but also in helping them to carry out the work that they want to do. So for example, we're working with a group called Parivar, which is a transgender organization, South Asian in its principal focus. And they have mounted a program beyond just the South Asian trans community to get money and funds directly into the hands of people in the transgender community who need it for rent or for food or for other immediate kind of needs. And so we are helping to provide them with funds that then they in turn can go out and grant out to individuals. So we're working with partners on both ends, the grantee end as well as on the foundation and the funding end. We're also working, there's one last note, we're also working with foundations of many kinds to try to maximize what we're able to do with Give Out Day, which, as many of you know, is an annual day, National Day of Giving that Horizons sponsors. This year, because of feedback from the people who participate, the organizations across the country, we've moved it to June 30th. And it provides an opportunity at a time when so many organizations have fundraising challenges that are actually suffering in the fundraising category. It gives them a chance to raise funds. And so we're working very hard together with our other foundation partners, as well as more than 400 partner LGBT groups around the country, to try to give them the opportunity to raise as much money as possible for their work.
Thank you, Roger. And thank you for everyone who is submitting questions. Again, you can use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I think Terry Chan has put some good instructions into the chat for everyone if you want to check that out. Our next question is for Francisco. Francisco, what are you hearing from grantees about what their greatest needs are right now?
Well, I have to say that our grantees are just amazing in the way they're responding, and I'm not sure that there's a greater need. I think there's a multiplier of needs, and what the COVID-19 pandemic has done is just increase the gaps that were already there, create some of the safety net, some of the holes in the safety net that we had worked to fill have been somewhat uncovered. So in terms of greater need, it depends who we're talking about. If we're talking about seniors who are sheltering in place, is how to keep them connected, how to keep them safe, how to get food to them. If we're talking about homeless youth, how do we help them shelter in place? If we're talking about rural communities, how do we make sure that all parts of the LGBT community stays connected? So the need is, it's depending on what part of our ecosystem you look at, it's just being amplified. But as I mentioned earlier, what's amazing is how it is not only that our LGBTQ organizations are responding, but how is it that our own community is responding? So for example, one of the grantee partners that we have is Turnout. Well, Turnout is working with Open House and Open Hand and many other organizations to get volunteers to them. What happened, right? A lot of organizations were not set up to do all the home checks and the food deliveries at the scale that they have. So we have organizations working with each other on making sure that they're navigating volunteers to where they're needed the most. And that's just amazing. And that also speaks to our community being able to respond in ways that not only giving money, but giving time, by showing up, by doing those home checks, by helping youth that are on the streets. What is it that they need today at this time? By looking at how is it that we're providing support group, how is it that we're providing mental health services. It's just that level of innovation and caring that just comes across. And the need is great. You know, I wish I can say, oh, if we just fund this, we're good to go. That is not the case with COVID-19. I think one of the benefits of Horizons is that we're able to look at the whole ecosystem and fund an ecosystem, not just fund one or two organizations at a time, but really fund a strategy that makes sense.
Thank you, Francisco. A related question, we've had a few people ask if you might want to elaborate a little bit. Several people are asking about the impact that the funds are having on the organizations and those they serve, if you wanted to add anything to what you've just said.
Well, I mean, I think it's twofold, because the way we designed this response was not only to provide COVID-19 funding, but also to help organizations who are, truly in financial distress. When COVID-19 happened, as most people on this call will know, it was spring season when a lot of fundraising events happen. Key funds that go to organizations that they can continue doing their work. Those did not happen. Some of them moved online. Some of them successful, some of them are not as successful, but the sources of funding were not coming in. Some of our arts organizations had to cancel their season. So what that means is that, our key long-term organizations are in financial distress, as well as our grassroots. So one of the impacts is that we're helping keep the doors open. The other impact is that we're seeing a ramp up in services that maybe organizations were not ready to. They've found ways to increase their support groups. They've found ways to increase their mental health online services, to increase their food deliveries. It's just a variety of different ways that, as we begin to fund in very specific areas in the ecosystem, that we've seen those bleeps in the radar where organizations are increasing their services.
Thank you very much, Francisco. And again, to everyone, please do continue submitting your questions through the Q&A tool. We're going to try to get to as many of them as possible. Roger, I want to turn one to you now. I think you'll like this one. So what would Horizons do differently if we had triple our giving budget?
Oh, well, gosh, where would I begin? I'm going to take that as in this COVID circumstance right now. So I think that I would prioritize three things. The first of those is to look very carefully at whether we are truly reaching all of the most vulnerable populations. I believe that we have through our grants, but to make sure that those who are most vulnerable to this pandemic, who correspond to those who are generally most vulnerable and marginalized, that we are making sure that their needs are being met as best possible. So that would be number one. Number two is I would have us look at making sure that some of our true anchor organizations in our community, that they are going to be able to weather this storm. Because nobody has seen something like this that has happened, among other things, so fast. And the harm that is causing is extreme in the strain on organizations. And in some cases, that might eventually even take the case of organizations working together. They might take different forms. It doesn't necessarily mean that every organization gets propped up, but what are the true anchor organizations? And then the third is that we would want to create what I would call a recovery fund. And the path between response, which is what we're doing now, responding to a crisis, and recovery, there's no bright line between those. But we need to be thinking about what is it that we can do to make sure that our community has the wherewithal, including those most vulnerable communities, to be able to recover from this tremendous blow. And so I would want to create some funding opportunities specifically for that purpose. So those would be the first things. Yeah. And can I just tag on to Francisco's answer really quick from the last one, just
Sure.
super fast? So I just wanted to say that a couple of the other things, and I know Francisco knows more, that specific examples of the kind of impact that some of the grants have had, and we haven't gotten grant reports from folks or anything like that. It's much too early. But for example, we know that with the Solano Community Center, the LGBT Community Center there, that is helping them, among other things, to provide extra mental health services, which they're finding that folks need. Or with the Transgender Interfaith Intersex Justice Project, TGIJP, that it's enabling them to provide extra assistance to LGBTQ folks, especially Black trans folks who are in the prison system, who are recently out of the prison system. And so there are many specific stories like that about the particular impact that the grants are having. I could go on, but I will leave it there.
Thank you. You'll have another opportunity to address a couple more questions here as we're moving on. This one actually could be for either you or Francisco. Maybe I'll address it to Francisco. Just one question about, are all of the grantees from the COVID emergency fund in the San Francisco Bay Area?
Yeah, they are. One is statewide, and they have offices here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but they are in the Bay Area. When we were putting this together, because the breadth of our usual funding at Horizons, we fund both LGBTQ primary organizations and those organizations that are for, by, and of LGBTQ people. We also fund allied organizations, and those are organizations that have a program that's specific to LGBTQ, to service LGBTQ folks in areas where there's not really an LGBTQ primary organization. We had to make some difficult decisions, and that was, the initial part is to limit the fund to LGBTQ primary organizations. So that was the first wave of funding. The second wave was to really look at where there were gaps in the first wave and begin to fill those gaps. So that was the second round, which is 65 organizations total. So yes, they're all part of the San Francisco Bay Area. And that was a specific decision we made early on with this particular fund. And that does not mean that We know that our DAF programs are funding organizations nationally. And we're also, through our Global Faith and Equality Fund, we're also doing some grant making for some of our international organizations through that fund. But for this particular fund is the Bay Area.
Thank you, Francisco. Let's see, again, we have a few more minutes to take questions. We have a couple more kind of in the queue, but if you do have questions, please don't hold on to them. And we'll be trying to get through as many of your questions as possible. I'm going to turn this one back to Roger. Roger, can you speak to any ways that Horizons is in reference to Horizons as a multiplier, any ways that we're partnering with city or the city or state, so about the specific needs of our community in any ways?
Most of our collaborations and coalitions have actually been with other funders at this time. We have not to date been as engaged around the state and the city. Many of the organizations that we support, of course, are very closely working with the city, or the cities, I should say, because it extends so far beyond just San Francisco. But that has not been our focus to date, but it is another layer that we will be looking at, because there may be some other ways we can help to leverage more funds to come into our communities by connecting donors and some of the public funds that are coming online as well.
Thank you. I'm just gonna stick with you, although I think either you or Francisco could answer this one, but we have a question about other ways that Horizons might be providing technical assistance to nonprofits. We have one specific question about whether we are helping LGBTQ nonprofits navigate the SBA Paycheck Protection Program or any other programs that might be of assistance right now. Yeah,
that's a great question. And the short answer is yes. We did do, I don't know if it's technically a webinar or what it was, but it was something that brought together folks from many organizations from throughout the community, specifically around the Paycheck Protection Program. Because, you know, we all have read about and heard about, you know, what chaos was involved. And particularly for some of the organizations in our community, so many of them are relatively small and they don't have big sophisticated staffs that necessarily can just get right on something like this. And so we were there to provide some assistance to, and brought some expertise to bear on that webinar and for organizations. We are also looking at, now that at least this second wave of grants is out, are there other topics that we can undertake? So for example, one of the ones that we've talked about is could we provide assistance to organizations around how to negotiate your lease, how to negotiate with your landlord? Because so many of us are burdened by the very, very high rents that are paid, and their revenues are going down at the same time. Are there ways that we can enlist some expertise to be able to help folks around those kinds of conversations? So that would be just one example, but we're definitely looking at doing more of those. I love that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. I think you're going to love this one also. And thank you to everyone for submitting your questions. But this question is, what is the best way that I can help Horizons right now?
Well, that's almost as good as, you know, we had triple the grant making budget, you know, to use. So thank you to whoever submitted that question. There are infinite ways, but I would isolate a couple. One of them is, you know, if you are able to give, you know, give to the COVID fund, or give directly to organizations that are serving our community. There are many non-LGBTQ causes in this pandemic which are absolutely urgent and important. And simultaneously, it's important for us to remember that while we have wonderful allies, it is we who fund our community, and our community organizations need us now. And the second thing that I would ask is that if you're inspired to do that, share the opportunity with people you know, because it's going to take many of us, and many people don't know about Horizon Fund, or they don't know about a wonderful organization that you care deeply about that is helping to respond to the pandemic. And you can help to make that possible because you've got that personal connection. This is a time when people are more open to hearing about those kinds of opportunities, because many people, they really want to contribute. They want to do something. And it's not always easy to know, well, what can I do? What can I do? And this is a way to help them to do that.
Great, thank you, Roger. I think we have time for just one last question, and then we'll move into the closing here.
Sarah, can I say a little bit, unpack a little bit the technical assistance, add one more thing about it before we go to that question?
Sure, of course.
I think, the other piece on technical assistance, and, when COVID-19 happened and we went into lockdown, we were scheduled to have Give Out Day in April. And, Give Out Day is our National Day of Giving. Horizons puts it on. And a lot of people think, oh, it's a fundraising event. We think about it internally in grant making and programs. We think about it as a technical assistance program. And that is to build the capacity of organizations to fundraise online. And so we postponed it to Pride Month, to June. So it's going to happen June 1st through June, with Give Out Day being June 30th, a whole month of engagement. But what we're doing is literally we're building the capacity of organizations at this time to be able to fundraise online, to move from in-person events to online fundraising. And because of Horizons, we're able to raise the funds through partnerships with other foundations to put on Give Out Day, not charge organizations to participate. They can use the platform at no cost, not only for Give Out Day, but throughout the year, with the tools and a lot of technical assistance. And how is it that you raise money online? Sometimes for a lot of organizations for the first time. And what we've done also, we put in some webinars on how is it that you need to maybe change your message at this time that's more specific around COVID, and then pivot from that. So that in itself is a big help for organizations in terms of practical technical assistance on how to do that type of fundraising. The other piece around the PPP, and one of the things that we know is that historically our organizations, our community, things don't trickle down the way they do for other communities, and sometimes we're left out. So one of the things that we're looking at is we're trying to assess what has been the level of access that our LGBTQ organizations have been able to have, not only for PPP, but for state or city level funding opportunities. For example, the city of San Francisco did a $2 million initiative on arts. We want to assess what has been the penetration of that level of assistance to our LGBTQ orgs, to then really turn around and have conversations on how is it that the further assistance and true assistance can really go down to the organizations that are needed the most.
Thank you, Francisco. And again, thank you to everyone for submitting your questions and for being with us. I want to I have my eye on the clock. And so again, we will be sharing this, the video recording with folks. And I just want to turn it back over to Roger for a closing.
Well, thank you, Tara, and thank you, Francisco. And thank you all for taking the time today to be with us. This is Horizon's 40th anniversary year. And with the COVID Emergency Fund and with all that we are trying to do with help from so many of you to be able to help our community get through this terrible calamity, we believe, marking this 40th anniversary in really the most meaningful way possible, more meaningful than any gala could be. Because for 40 years, Horizons has been about connecting people in our community, connecting us around our shared commitment to justice and our shared love for this community. And that community, our community, it needs our help. It needs help from all of us. This is a true crisis. It's a true emergency. And I want to thank all of you who have donated to the COVID-19 Fund once again. And I want to encourage you, any of you who have not had a chance to do so yet, to consider doing so. 100% of those contributions will go out to the community in grants. And information about how you can do that is going up in the chat area now. We'll also put it up on the screen when we finish up in just a minute or two. Thank you for considering those donations. And in closing, I just want to say that we will get through this. I think we all know that we will get through this. It is times like this when I believe that character is truly revealed, be that character of an individual or character of a whole community. And not only is it a time when character is revealed, but it's a time when we together we have an opportunity to be truly at our very, very best, to be the kind of community we all hold dear, the kind of community that we've so often shown ourselves to be. A community where we know and where we act like we know that every one of us matters and that we are going to leave no one behind. I know that is who we are. And we all know who and what we can be when we are at our best. Resilience runs in the blood of our community. So does compassion, and so does generosity. And I truly, deeply believe that right now, in this crisis, those run deeper than ever. So in closing, I want to say thank you. Please stay healthy. Please stay well. All of our gratitude for your gifts to Horizons, and in any way you are helping this world and our community to respond to this pandemic. We are grateful and we thank you. Please enjoy the rest of your day. And again, stay well and healthy. Thank you so much.